So I want to address Kell Brook versus Frankie Gavin. The fight's getting stiff. The fight is getting a lot of hate on the forums, on Twitter, etc. Now I like to try and speak openly and without bias. There's been times I've criticised Eddie Hearn. I've done a recent few videos on the finances in boxing, suggesting, that his negotiation techniques, his offers to Carl Frampton haven't been as generous as he's making out. I'm happy to call him out on stuff like that. But there's also been times that I've defended him. I did a piece defending him after he appeared on the Boxing Asylum podcast, where the guys just wanted to tear a strip off him. They weren't interested in engaging in discussion. I like to keep it balanced. And I must admit, I think the hate for this Gavin Brook fight is completely unwarranted. I actually quite like the fight. And I try not to ramble on for too long, but I've got 9 separate reasons why people should not hate on this fight. Obviously some of them are linked, but 9 separate distinct points. Let me talk you through them briefly. Firstly, the main reason to like this fight is activity from Kell Brook. This is a guy who got in a near fatal accident recently, and we're seeing him boxing in March, in May, and then once again in June or July. To have the option of seeing a British world champion this active is absolutely fantastic. Now I appreciate that Frankie Gavin is not the toughest, best welterweight out there in the world. But this is different to Amir Khan fighting Chris Algieri. This is different, in my opinion, to Floyd Mayweather fighting Marcus Maidana. And I'll tell you why. Because Amir Khan fights very irregularly. He fights once or twice a year. So when he has a fight against a tough opponent, it means that Amir Khan's year focuses on fighting a tough opponent. That's not the case with Kell Brook. His activity is so regular, certainly in terms of what we're expecting to see over like a 3 or 4 month period this year, that I don't think we should complain. Realistically, he can't fight Mayweather, Pacquiao and Khan 3 fights back to back. So I think the first thing to be positive about is the activity from Kell, and we should understand with his programme of events, perhaps more slack should be given to him in terms of the opponent than a fighter like Amir Khan or Floyd Mayweather, who fights much less regularly. The second thing is, now that the decision's been made to have him fight on May the 30th, which we should view as a positive thing, we have to be realistic about the opponent that they're going to bring in. Now this is a bill that already has Lee Selby in a title fight, already has Kevin Mitchell in a title fight, already has Anthony Joshua, John Ryder versus Blackwell, Dave Ryan versus John Wayne Hibbert. This is a relatively stacked bill. We can't expect Eddie Hearn on, 6-7 weeks notice to be bringing in a Manuel Marquez or a Brandon Rios for a bill this stacked. Realistically, the budget isn't there financially. Secondly, he's got to pay Gradovich to come to the UK and defend his title. He's got to pay Linares to come to the UK and defend his title. He's got to pay Kevin Johnson to fight Anthony Joshua. He's got to win purse bids for Blackwell Ryder. He's got to pay Kell Brook. To be fair to Hearn, there probably isn't the budget for a Manuel Marquez on this side. And also, with the amount of time, you need more to promote a fight like that. So reason 1 is the activity from Kell. Reason 2 is you're not going to get a superstar for such short notice, especially if we consider how stacked the bill is. Number 3, let's not forget, Kell had to fight someone in the IBF top 15. It has to be someone who isn't coming off a loss. Who else could he have fought from the IBF top 15? Saddam Ali, Anton Dekari, Diego Chavez, okay fighters. Saddam Ali, Diego Chavez, arguably they're better than Frankie Gavin, but they're certainly not a different planet to Frankie Gavin. Realistically, how many of that list could he have fought on this notice? Bearing in mind it had to be a top 15 guy not coming off a loss. Bear in mind, I don't even think the IBF has a rank 1 or 2. So even though it's 15 slots on the list, it's only might actually be 12 or 13 guys. Some of whom are coming off losses. Some of whom are unavailable because they've got other fights. My point is, if he wasn't fighting Frankie Gavin, it wouldn't be a superstar name anyway. So I wouldn't hate on the Frankie Gavin fight. Number 4, people are being unfair on Frankie Gavin. The fact he is not the most stylistically entertaining fighter doesn't mean he's terrible. I rate Leonard Bundu. That fight was very, very close. Gavin could have won. Bradley Skeet gave him trouble, but Skeet is a tall, awkward guy. Gavin is not a top 10 welterweight. He's not really a top 15 welterweight, in my opinion. But he's not terrible. In my opinion, he's better than Jojo Dan. He's not an absolutely disgusting opponent. I think given the fact that we factor in the activity from Kell, the short notice, the fact that it had to be someone from that list, Gavin isn't actually, the worst in the world. I think certain people are exaggerating how bad Frankie Gavin is. Number 5, let's not forget, Gavin is a matchroom fighter. We're going to be subjected to watching him fight, if you love him or if you hate his style. Most people hate his style. Now, my point is this is the only interesting fight for Frankie Gavin. How many of us are actually sitting there waiting to watch Frankie Gavin versus Chris Van Heerden? How many of us want to watch Frankie Gavin in a fight against a welterweight you've never heard of? My point is, if you're a UK boxing fan, you are going to be subjected to Frankie Gavin's style on Sky TV. And I would suggest that this is the most interesting fight to be subjected to Frankie Gavin in. My suggestion is you will watch this fight, even if you would normally snooze through Frankie Gavin matchups. So I think, in a kind of lesser of two evils argument, this is the most interesting fight out there for Gavin. Number 6. In the interests of being fair to Gavin and supporting him as a British boxer, if this fight didn't happen, how else is he going to get a shot? Look at the division. Mayweather, Pacquiao, Amir Khan. If Frankie Gavin didn't get his opportunity now, he'd never get his opportunity. Now, I know Frankie Gavin, I think Stuart on the Boxing Voice says Frankie Gavin could put a glass eye to sleep. But I've met the guy. I've spoken to him. He's a nice, friendly guy. We support British boxers. He was happy to sign autographs, pose for photos with fans, This is the only way he's going to get a shot. And I don't like to see British boxers being held back unnecessarily and people trying to prevent that from happening. So I'm cool with it for that reason. Fundamentally, reason number 7, I like this fight. Fundamentally, I think Frankie Gavin's going to find true success in the 140-pound division. I think he's too small and too feather-fisted for welterweight. And I think with the depth of talent at the welterweight division, should he lose to Kell Brook, that may be the only option for him. So I actually think, in the long run, this could be better for Frankie Gavin, even if he does take a loss here. Because I think it might force him into 140. Number 8. It's a different style for Kell. We've seen Kell against Sean Porter, we've seen Kell against Jojo Dan recently. Guys who are going to get on the inside, guys who are going to charge him, guys who are going to try and come forward. Frankie Gavin's a different test. Perhaps not the test that's going to be most aesthetically entertaining to the casual fan, but nonetheless, there is scope for him to ask questions of Kell in a sort of technical boxing sense, which, look, it's not going to be the most thrilling, it's not going to be a fight that you talk about in 10 years' time, but as a hardcore boxing fan, I have some interest in seeing how Kell will deal with that. Finally, number 9. It's a domestic title fight. We know Frankie Gavin. I remember there were stories of Kell Brook fighting Anton Decarie. we've just seen him fight Jojo Dan. People know Frankie Gavin. Even if people don't like Frankie Gavin, we know him. It's a domestic fight. My point is, this isn't the greatest fight in the world. But I'm really pleased it's happening. I was expecting Kell Brook to do the mandatory against Jojo Dan and a summer fight against a Brandon Rios. Now we've got a summer fight in Jojo Dan, a summer fight with Brandon Rios, and this. It's not taking anything away from us. This is a bonus fight. This is a welcome addition. It's a short notice opponent. We couldn't really expect a big name. And for a top 15 IBF fighter, Frankie Gavin isn't the worst name. And for that list, he isn't actually the worst fighter on the list. For me, it's the best opportunity for Frankie Gavin. It's the most interesting fight we could see Frankie Gavin in. And even if you don't like Frankie Gavin, he poses a different style for Kell, and it's a domestic fight. And we've got to applaud domestic fights. I like the fight. I think it's unfair to criticise it. I think it would be fair to criticise it if they'd had 6 months to choose an opponent, or if Kell Brook was only fighting once a year. But given the fact that Kell Brook is going to be fighting every 6 to 8 weeks, over his last fight, this fight, the next fight, given the fact that there hasn't been time to organise a mega name, I'm quite happy with this. Let me know your thoughts. Thanks for watching.